Andy Burnham has always been one of the Labour Party's more charismatic figures, but like many charismatic types, he's also something of a chameleon. So who is the Greater Manchester Mayor? The man who could well be the UK's next Prime Minister. And what exactly does he believe?
Someone who people can relate to, who understands their lives. I am that person. I can unite this country. And that is why I am standing to be leader of the Labour Party.
That was Andy Burnham's pitch in 2015, the last time he tried to lead the Labour Party. That was, of course, following the resignation of Ed Miliband. But what was his broader stall? This was Burnham on his competitor and the eventual winner of the race, Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, I agree with some of the things Tony Blair has said, but unlike him, I do understand why people have responded to Jeremy Corbyn. People are fed up with the way politics is. They're fed up with a Labour Party that sometimes has looked like a pale imitation of the Tories. They want something different, and I am offering change in this leadership election, a Labour vision, a Labour Party that people can believe in again. But the big difference is also a vision that can win for Labour in 2020. It's no good us promising the earth, promising to print money, because that way people won't trust us on the economy. I am making commitments, but I am saying how they'll be paid for.
Burnham first entered Parliament in 2001 when the recently graduated Cambridge English literature student won the Labour safe seat of Lee in Greater Manchester. During his career under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, he was a loyalist to the New Labour project, taking up one ministerial post after another, including in the Treasury. In 2009, he then became Secretary of State for Health, where he proposed a national care service, which would introduce publicly funded social care free at the point of delivery on the model of the NHS. Those plans never got off the ground, with the Labour Party losing the 2010 general election just a few months later. After Gordon Brown stepped down, Burnham launched his first bid to be Labour leader, running on a platform of aspirational socialism. He explained it in this campaign video.
It is a vision of a society in which we'll all have the opportunity to be the best that we can be, not determined by the postcode of the bed you were born in. A society which won't exist as a barrier to our hopes and dreams, and a party which won't fawn in the face of big business and the markets. Aspirational socialism sets out new ideas to help people of all ages get on in life.
Those ideas included an end to unpaid internships, the large-scale purchase of private accommodation by councils, and a rejigged version of that national care service funded by a 10% inheritance tax on all estates. Burnham also showed an early ear for a left-wing populist line, taking swings at the metropolitan elite. Burnham lost that leadership race in 2010 to Ed Miliband, instead becoming Shadow Secretary for Education. His second chance, as we said, came in 2015, following Ed Miliband's resignation after another disastrous general election for Labour. It was during that race that Burnham began to look a little bit metropolitan elite himself, after it was revealed that he claimed £17,000 a year to rent a London flat, despite owning another one within walking distance of Westminster. There was, however, no suggestion of any wrongdoing under parliamentary rules at the time. It was also in that race that his record as a loyal MP under Blair began to come into question over the single issue that had driven more voters away from the Labour Party than probably any other: the Iraq War.
I can just say to you that I agonised about that decision, and in the end, the reason I voted for military action was because the leader of the Iraqi Kurds came to Parliament and pleaded with us not to back down. He said that if you leave Saddam emboldened, that will just be misery for our people. And I think, what they may not really be fair about, the people who make those claims, is that this isn't a kind of black or white situation. If we had left Saddam in place at that time, other people would have suffered. There wasn't a kind of easy answer, was there?
There kind of was an easy answer. Don't invade a sovereign country when you've got no plan for what to do afterwards. Even if you did have a plan of what to do afterwards, don't invade a sovereign country, which was done on false pretenses, backed by some neoconservative extremists in Washington. Anyway, following Jeremy Corbyn's election as leader in that contest in 2015, Burnham served as Shadow Home Secretary. It was in that job that he called for the Tory government to scrap its Prevent policy, and that's the counter-terror programme that's proved to be at best, well, fairly useless. Although, I don't know, it's up in the air, that one. One of his most affecting moments in the Corbyn cabinet came when he gave this speech following the conclusion of the Hillsborough inquiry in 2016, after years of campaigning by Burnham and others.
What kind of country leaves people who did no more than wave off their loved ones to a football match, still sitting in a courtroom 27 years later, begging for the reputations of their sons, daughters, brothers, sisters and fathers? The answer is one that needs now to do some deep soul searching.
Following Burnham's announcement that he'll now run in the Makerfield by-election, his old boss, Jeremy Corbyn, gave this view of the Manchester mayor.
I worked with Andy in the shadow cabinet. He didn't take part in the coup. He then left the shadow cabinet in order to run for Greater Manchester mayor. He's done a good job, particularly on the buses and public transport. However, I have noticed that of late that Andy's economic strategy isn't particularly radical, and indeed his suggestion that there should be private finance borrowing in order to pay for defence increases fills me with horror. It's almost as bad as a PFI in the health service, that we would end up allowing the private sector to be involved in the running of our defence industries with an inbuilt demand to spend more and more.
Of course, Corbyn is no longer a Labour MP, but parliamentary leader of your party. He's not the first, though, to raise questions about Burnham's fondness for PFIs. So that's a funding arrangement invented by his old bosses, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. While Health Secretary in 2010, Burnham approved the disastrous Royal Liverpool Hospital plan, largely funded by private finance initiatives. 7 years later, with the PFI collapsing, completion ended up delayed by a further 6 years, and the entire much increased bill picked up by the public purse. Burnham has obviously been a pretty successful and very popular Greater Manchester mayor, comfortably winning 3 elections since 2017. In 2020, he gained the moniker King of the North after criticising the impact of the Tories' COVID lockdown policies in the north of the country in a speech that went viral.
It's wrong to place some of the poorest parts of England in a punishing lockdown without proper support for the people and businesses affected.
2020 was also the year Burnham backed current Prime Minister Keir Starmer for Labour leader, saying this about the lame duck leader currently occupying number 10. Keir is a brilliant man. The fact he was a former DPP, Director of Public Prosecutions, and came to work in my shadow Home Office team with no airs and graces says a lot about Keir Starmer. Of course, at that time, it was Manchester, not Westminster, that was Burnham's political home. And there's no denying Burnham has overseen some extremely popular policies in the city. Manchester's integrated public transport system, the B network, has grown from buses and trams to include local train services. That was after Burnham took the city's transport infrastructure into public control. It's that success that's led him to coin the phrase Manchesterism, a concept that involves a step up in government control of essential services. Public control, he told the New Statesman in September, is everything. Of course, he added, it's also business-friendly socialism. There are some cases where that philosophy hasn't delivered much socialism, such as Manchester's skyscraper boom. That's in Burnham's Greater Manchester Authority loan £1 billion in public money to private companies, which have built 11,000 properties, with just 500 of them classed as affordable. 700 million of that £1 billion pot is said to have gone to a single company. Renica, its owner, Darren Whitaker, recently appears to have shifted his residency to tax haven Monaco, though there's no suggestion of any wrongdoing. Again, the Yimbys love Manchester because they built loads. One of the reasons they would say why Manchester's been such of a success, but what's the best model to do it? I suppose Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham would have said he doesn't have enough money to do it himself, so you have to rely on private developers. As I say, the model does seem to be working in Manchester, a city whose economy has been growing by over 3% per year for a decade. That's twice as good as the whole of the UK, or sort of the average rate of the UK, according to the BBC. Burnham's real weapon, though, is his popularity. According to YouGov, his net favourability rating eclipses every other party leader and major Labour politician in the country. Interesting, when you've got a background of a person who's stood for leader twice, quite a lot of material to work from, isn't there?
He's been doing this for a long time. I mean, 2001, right? Does he come straight out of university then?
Sounds like he went straight from Cambridge University to working. I think he was probably, a parliamentary assistant and then MP. So he has been in, the whole idea of Burnham as man of the people, he has been in politics his whole life.
Yeah.
But clearly the move to become Manchester mayor as opposed to an MP has given him an image of being a more sort of down-to-earth everyman. Whether or not that should be taken at face value is a different question.
He's been able to recreate his image, which is a very important thing, I think, to be able to do in politics. It's interesting, looking at some of those old clips, even seeing him in a suit and a tie, I was like, that looks weird. That's not the Andy Burnham we know, and I have memories of Andy Burnham. I've been following politics, unfortunately, for a long time. But yeah, it was strange that's all been like memory hold, that version of Andy Burnham, which is, perhaps a testament to his ability to be able to reinvent himself politically. So he's clearly been on a political journey. I don't begrudge him for that, because I actually think there's lots of people, myself included, we've all been on.
I mean, Zach Polanski sang a song at the Lib Dems 2015
I was going to
conference.
Yeah, Zach's been on a journey. And I
Lib
believe
Dem fight back. Lib Dem fight back. It's actually it's the Labour Party's most successful attack ad on him, I think, because he also is dressed a bit like a magician.
Yeah, it's a pretty funky funky rendition. I'm not going to do a version. I'll save everyone's
You don't want to
ears.
harmonise with me.
No. So he's been on a political journey, as have many other people. That I'm not too bothered about that. But I suppose it's thinking about what are the goals here? If we're thinking from the perspective of what does the left want? Does the left want a kind of fully paid up, socialist ideological program, that can move forwards with kind of no pressure? I suspect not. I suspect that's not what we'll be getting with Andy Burnham if the Greens allow him to come through. He secures that win and he becomes presumably Labour leader after that. That's not what we're going to get. I think probably what we would get is we'd probably get someone who's a bit more economically interventionist. I think that reflective of some of his time in Manchester, although we've seen some potholes in some of that with reliance on the private sector around housing, which isn't great. But I think there will be more economic intervention, a bit of Keynesianism. That's things in the right direction, at least. For me personally, I would say, anti-austerity, a bit more anti-austerity there as well. So he'll be essentially delivering perhaps something akin to around a social democracy vision. And there's an argument to say that the Green Party at the moment are also offering social democracy. They're not actually offering like socialism, with the capital letters, yet they're offering some kind of a social democracy platform. And I've got no big issue with that, all right? I'm hoping that he might signal a more positive position on Gaza. Mm-hmm. The record on Iraq is a big sticking point, I think, for a lot of people on the left, a lot of people who believe themselves to be anti-war. I think other people have picked up on this. He may avoid calling it things like a genocide if that's going to implicate his future cabinet. Yeah. If you've got David Lammy sat next to you, are you going to be calling it a genocide? Do you feel like you have that political maneuverability to do that? So he's hamstrung somewhat in the position that he may well find himself in, right? So there's caps on this. There's a limitation, I think, on what we can expect from Burnham. But ultimately, I think he can pull things in the right direction. Your colleague, Aaron Bastani, made the point that Keir Starmer has delivered on some soft left things. It's not been a total kind of right-wing project. I think there are some holes in some of the policies that they've delivered around the soft left end of things. The free breakfast schools program, for example, is a good example of a great idea on paper that moves things in the right direction, but they've not really put enough funding behind it. Schools were complaining when it was rolled out that they only had about 17 pence per pupil, for example. So that's not, it's a soft left policy in on paper, but like you've not actually delivered it, very well. You could also make an argument maybe about some of the nationalising of rail, which apparently seems to not be working very well either. So I think Andy Burnham could take things in the right direction, could be a useful ally on some specific things. Will he do the transformative economic work required? That means, I think, really imagining both wealth redistribution, which the left likes to talk about, but also wealth creation from a leftist perspective, right? Will he do that stuff? I don't think so. But he perhaps clears the pathway, clears things more towards the left for that more ambitious economic transformation to happen.